This is Frogger, a 44-year-old icon of video gaming history, but right now it is dying. Like all retro arcades, it has an Achilles heel that will always eventually fail: its screen. If it fails, it could be lost forever. The crazy part? The fix only costs about €1. The catch? If I mess this up, the screen could literally kill me. I will show you why all old arcades and CRTs in general need this fix, how to figure out what you need, do the repair safely, and show you some arcade history. Will everything work out, or will this end in a game over? Let's dive in. Frogger is considered one of the best video games of all time. In the early 80s, it stood alongside Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, and Space Invaders as a king of the arcade halls. The gameplay is simple, yet challenging, addictive, and also very recognizable. Frogger was developed by the legendary Konami in 1981. In Japan and Europe, it was distributed by another iconic company, Sega, and in North America by Sega Gremlin. This one is a Sega Gremlin model, which typically features a wood grain cabinet that was used for multiple games. The arcade is in excellent condition. Cosmetically, it looks great, apart from some minor scuffs, like several cracks in the control panel overlay and a scratch on the marquee. But other than that, it looks great for its 44-year-old age. Most importantly, the game is in working order. The inside is very clean too, and all components seem to be present, and most importantly for me, in a fully original state. The original game PCB and CRT screen are two crucial elements for an authentic experience. There is, however, one big issue. The CRT screen ticks. Sadly, I couldn't capture this on video, but sometimes, randomly, the screen makes a clicking sound and the entire image jumps to the side. This sounds somewhat trivial, but it can really break your focus when playing the game, and more importantly, signals a deeper internal problem. So let's dig deeper and try to find what is going wrong. I want to take a look at the screen, which in this cabinet is not entirely exposed when removing the back door. Instead, there's a second panel that's held in place with screws. Luckily, these are easily removed, so I can take off the panel. This reveals the entire CRT assembly. Now, before going any further, a word of caution. CRTs can be very dangerous to work on. They can contain up to 30,000 volts and act like a giant capacitor that can store a charge up to weeks after being unplugged. This can be lethal if you get shocked. I have to be very careful. Now, to actually discharge the CRT, the ground and inner conductive layer have to be shorted. To do this, I take a screwdriver with an alligator clip attached to the metal frame and pry it underneath the anode. That's this rubber cup. Underneath it, there's a metal clip that makes contact with the inside of the tube. Touching the clip causes a short and discharges the CRT. Phew, that was scary. But with that dangerous step out of the way, the screen can finally be removed safely. In this Sega Gremlin arcade, the screen is fixed to a wooden carriage and screwed to the cabinet. Several screws have to be removed first near the back of the cabinet, as well as near the front. Then all cables have to be unplugged, like the video signal header, power supply and earth. Another obstacle, the cardboard bezel and backdrop block the screen from being removed. The clearance is just too small to slide the screen out, so it has to be moved out of the way. The cardboard is held in place with a couple of staples. These are easily removed with a screwdriver. Once all staples are removed, the bezel can be lifted up, providing enough wiggle room. Now finally, the CRT carriage can slide out, but once again I have to be very careful not to let the underside fall down, as these Sega Gremlin cabinets don't have rails for the entire sliding length, only short blocks. If I drop the CRT, it could easily break its neck or damage components underneath. With the CRT on the workbench, I can take a proper look to see what we're dealing with. It appears to be a K4600 model, made by Wells Gardner, one of the well-known manufacturers of CRTs at the time. The K4600 is also a rather common model in arcade cabinets. Just like the cabinet, it looks quite clean and nothing seems out of the ordinary on first sight. I really wonder what is causing the ticking. I'll need to dig even deeper and take a look at the CRT chassis, the brains of it all. It's the circuit board that controls everything. The chassis is attached to the CRT frame with a couple of screws. Some additional things have to be detached, like this ground wire, the horizontal width coil and the connector for the degaussing coil. a coil around the CRT screen that produces a magnetic pulse to correct color and geometry issues. I carefully remove more connections and gently wiggle the neck board off of the CRT's neck. Removing the anode is another critical step. It's quite a pain as it clips through the glass tube to make contact with the inside. It has to be squeezed together so it fits through the hole. Lots of fiddling later, the anode finally comes off. Next, the RGB connections to the yoke can be disconnected and the flyback diode can be removed. There's one remaining cable left that doesn't have a connector, so I cut it for now to get everything loose. I hope this won't cause any issues later on. The CRT is now free from most of its electronics, with just a yoke remaining. Let's put the tube to the side and focus on the chassis. I need to investigate each individual PCB, so more disassembly is required. Talking about PCBs, the sponsor of this video is once again JLCPCB. They make high-quality PCB production available for a great price. I used them myself to DIY the controller in my virtual pinball machine and make the open source nearly universal ROM programmer. JLCPCB is truly reliable, and they even offer 6-layer boards, perfect for more complex projects and easier routing. 6-layer PCBs are usually expensive, but even those are affordable with JLCPCB. Get a limited time coupon for $33 off of 6-layer PCBs, and as always, order boards up to 10 by 10 centimeters for just $2. Thanks to JLCPCB for helping the channel grow, and now let's get on with the video. This K4700 chassis has 2 daughter boards, which are held in place with a plastic bracket. Finally, I get to the core of the problem. Each one of these PCBs has multiple capacitors, components that are rated for a limited lifespan. Certainly not 44 years. They can leak, causing acid damage to a whole area around it, or even worse, short out, which can cause irreparable damage to the circuit. I look around the boards trying to find the culprit. It looks like some wires were soldered to the main PCB, so maybe this CRT already had issues in the past, and someone did some repairs before. Or maybe these were done in the factory. I think it looks like the second option. Taking a further look, it seems that the solder on the capacitors already looks newer than the other solder joints. Looking at the capacitors, it does seem that most of the smaller ones don't have a layer of dust on them, compared to other components and the more niche capacitors. Suspicious. Finally, I spot this hacky workaround of an axial capacitor soldered in place of a radial one, which confirms my suspicion that this PCB already had some work done in the past. Now it must be that they didn't do their work properly, as the screen taking problem is occurring. I investigate further and finally spot it. An outlier. C621. A special high voltage film capacitor, and it's notorious. This capacitor somewhat commonly fails in K4600 CRTs. It looks like someone already replaced the capacitors on this main PCB with the values they had laying around, but skipped the ones with special specs like C621 or the big B+ voltage capacitor. Before doing any work, it's best to quickly check if these capacitors have charge left. I discharged the CRT, but these are rather large capacitors as well, and can hold their charge for an extended time too. I quickly check the voltage on all larger capacitors to verify that they are in fact discharged. Now, to save this CRT properly, I can't just swap a single capacitor. I need to replace all of them. 26 to be exact. A full cap kit, a set of all capacitors used across all PCBs. These kits can be bought ready-made from arcade shops, but these are almost all located in the US, while I'm located in Europe. Shipping would be way too expensive and inconvenient. Luckily, capacitors are just common components, so I set off to compile a kit myself. With some minimal research, I'm able to find the manual of the CRT, and in this case even a so-called cap map, a diagram that shows which capacitor goes where and what specs they all have. Perfect. With that list in hand, I can search for each type of capacitor in an electronics store like Mouser or DigiKey, making sure they have the same specifications. Capacitors can have a higher voltage spec, as that is just a maximum value, but the capacity should always be the same. This is a time-consuming process, but once I compiled the entire shopping cart, I can finally order the kit. Apart from the components, there's also an essential piece of equipment, this desoldering station. The tip of the gun can heat solder above its melting point, and with the trigger, a vacuum can suck it up. This removes the solder from the component leads, allowing them to easily be removed. This is a real time saver, compared to solder wick or a manual pump. So finally, let's start fixing things. I hope this turns out well, because a single mistake can cause permanent damage. Using the desoldering station, I removed the solder attaching the C621 capacitor to the PCB. Turning it over, I can finally remove the culprit that this was all about. I toss it aside and insert the replacement. Flipping the board over, I can solder it in place and cut off the protruding leads. To make sure I remember that this capacitor was already replaced, I mark it with a small dot. The main issue should now be fixed, but to be sure, I also want to replace all other caps. Now that the PCBs are all freed up, it's a smaller effort. I continue along the same line in this 26-piece jigsaw puzzle, spread across multiple boards. I desolder more capacitors and double check the specifications of each one, just to be sure. I then look at my list, find the appropriate replacement, insert it into the PCB, making sure the polarity is correct, solder it in place and mark it. This process has to be repeated for a good while. I actually like it, figuring out where everything goes and putting it back together. After more replacements, an obstacle pops up. The big B+ capacitor. It's not a regular capacitor with 2 leads, but instead has 4 tabs that snap into place and are then twisted. The tabs are too big for the desoldering gun. I try to remove it using a simple solder wick, but I just cannot get it out. Eventually, I have to resort to my hot air station to evenly heat all 4 tabs until the capacitor finally comes off. It's definitely a huge capacitor, and also an interesting testimony to how technology has evolved over the last 40 years. Its modern replacement has the same specifications, but it's just a fraction of its size. Luckily, the replacement capacitor is just a normal one, instead of a snap-in. The board provides 2 holes for this as well, but they have to be freed up first. As always, the new capacitor can be fitted in place and soldered down. There's a lot of flex residue from the desoldering, so I clean that up with a bit of isopropyl alcohol. Not really necessary with the type of flux I used, but it looks cleaner. With this obstacle conquered, the entire main PCB now has fresh capacitors. It took some time, but the board should now be good to go for the foreseeable future. Now of course, the 2 daughter boards need some attention too. The first board only has a single capacitor, so this is a super easy fix. The second board has a lot more capacitors and components in general, tightly packed together. This time I desolder all the capacitors in one go, replace them all and then solder everything to save some time. There's one little PCB I forgot, which is attached to the metal side I took off earlier. It's in a bit of an awkward spot, but the caps can also be replaced rather easily. With all the capacitors now replaced, it's time for one last puzzle. Assembling everything again. Using reference pictures I took on my phone during every step of the disassembly, I can easily piece the puzzle back together in the reverse order. Slowly but surely, the chassis and the neckboard come back together. So, time to grab the tube again. The chassis can slide back in place, and I connect the degaussing coil again, as well as mount a flyback diode. Now that pesky anode has to be inserted again, which, just like when I disconnected it, is equally finicky to get back in place. After that, the yoke can be connected and the neckboard. The cable I cut needs to be reconnected as well. Ideally, I'd use a connector here, but I don't have any on hand. So I'll solder it back together and hope it can be left untouched for a long time to come. Finally, the whole CRT can be inserted into the cabinet again and the entire wiring plugged in. For future reference, I'll write the date of the cap kit on the back of the CRT. Should have done this before inserting the CRT, as this is a pretty inconvenient angle to write in, as you can see by the quality of my poor handwriting. Alright, it's time for a very scary step. It's time to power it on for the very first time again. If I swapped around only a single polarity or used the wrong voltage, these capacitors can blow up. Let's turn it on now and see what happens. Alright, fingers crossed. I think it's working. The CRT squeals. Let's take a look. Yeah, it's working. Perfect, nothing blew up and everything is working. But let's not celebrate too early. There's one final thing left to check, and that is the B+ voltage. I mentioned it a couple of times before, but this voltage is basically the main DC voltage that the CRT runs off of. It's also the voltage from which the extremely high voltages are derived from, and the too high B+ voltage can cause the X-rays as a result. Just to be safe and be sure that the CRT operates within its normal specifications, you should always verify the B+ after doing a cap kit. For the K4600, this is measured by connecting one lead to the chassis ground and the other to the blue wire connected to this TR502, a large transistor. It measures 132 volts, while it ideally should be 127. But since the adjustment dial is glued down and prone to breaking, I'll leave it as is, since it's an acceptable deviation. With everything completed, let's now finally take a proper look at the screen. It looks crisp and colorful, just like it's 1981. And most importantly, no ticking. So there it is. The cheap fix that brings a 44-year-old piece of tech back to life. Hopefully, Frogger can keep on hopping for many more years to come. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like, comment, share or subscribe. I would much appreciate it. If you'd like, check out one of my other videos on screen now, or subscribe not to miss any of my future videos because I still got plenty more projects to come.